There were a few major themes I was considering for the recent eclipse season during my fall look ahead video, such as the election, the SEC versus Ripple lawsuit, the Fed meeting, US debt, and the banking system in general. A lot of it was right, some was sort of in the middle, and a few minor things didn't happen. Such as we didn't see XRP rise from the dead between eclipses as I'd hoped, but it might be interesting to see that it did in fact peak between eclipses. So even though this isn't exactly what I meant, it is true depending on how zoomed in you are. Of all the themes I mentioned in the video, the most major theme involved the election, specifically if the US government might shut down during the election. So let's recap on this point and then I'll progress into the winter outlook. I had read bits of Christine Skinner's newsletter and had also known the end of the fiscal year was approaching, which brought a few election scenarios to mind. The election is still unfolding, of course, and since the video, I've only seen more people talking about something unusual happening this time. We can all probably sense there is something different. If not the assassination attempts on Trump or how Kamala found her way into being the Democratic candidate, the weather is awfully wild this year in the southeast United States. Hurricanes have killed at least 220 people, and these are said to be once-in-a-century storms. I'm suspicious whenever I see this terminology used. Anyway, Hurricane Helene disrupted the mail service and made some polling locations and elections offices inaccessible, on top of voters losing identifications and absentee ballots being destroyed in the floods. Maybe this year they have issues with counting ballots, missing or destroyed ballots, or voting offices that can't operate as usual due to flooding or other damages. This article discusses how it was exactly 24 years ago that the historical tie between Bush and Gore had to be decided by the Supreme Court. And within the first year of Bush's presidency after this historical voting delay, 9/11 happened and the U.S. entered the war in Afghanistan on October 7th. We'll follow this theme throughout, so pay attention. The article further discusses how the Supreme Court could significantly influence the upcoming presidential election through rulings on ballot access, vote counting, and election disputes. At the same time, hurricane season will continue throughout the election season, and there are several key swing states such as North Carolina and especially Georgia that are frequently in the path of the storms. Delayed results from either state could hold up the entire election in a similar fashion as the 2000s elections. Interestingly enough, the man in the Time magazine cover is Vladimir Putin. And this is indeed a real magazine cover that named Putin Man of the Year, which is really strange because he is a very key person on the world stage right now, and there is the possibility of a similarly strange election. The title of the fall video specifically drew attention to the possibility of the US government shutting down during the elections for fiscal reasons, which will not be happening unless they're very delayed. It isn't impossible, as it turns out, because an October shutdown was indeed in the cards. This is because the debt is sky high right now. As you can see, current debt levels seem to be finding support on top of the World War II all-time high, somewhere around 120%. They were, however, able to pass a bill that funded the U.S. government until December 20th. So if the election is delayed until late December, the topic of the government shutdown might simply be used for fear-mongering, like, if you voted for the wrong candidate, there will be dire consequences. This actually happened in 2012 as the fiscal cliff discussion was happening during the election between Romney and Obama. While that election wasn't delayed, that type of heightened pressure has happened in the past. Whatever happens though, it seems that bad weather will stress how archaic and insecure the voting system really is. And with how politicized crypto is in this election, it might become clear that blockchain is far superior to voting with physical mail. And if we see this narrative, it could drive some type of permanent plateau type of euphoria to crypto. Christine Skinner had mentioned bank failures, and I thought this might happen around the Fed meeting because it was on an eclipse during a full moon. I didn't see any bank failures, although the 50-point rate cuts indicate there was major stress in the system. A lot of people actually believe the Fed is in control when they say rate cuts are happening because they've got inflation under control, but really they're just guiding the market psychology like the Wizard of Oz. They want the economy to be strong now, so they tell you it's recovering when it's not. They simply tell everyone what to think until eventually the system breaks and then blame a scapegoat when it does. So no bank failures yet, but this is certainly still unfolding. Another part of the video focused on banking reforms, which did happen exactly on the lunar eclipse. The new guidelines impose stricter scrutiny on bank mergers, which creates uncertainty for them, which requires banks to show that their plans won't create a monopoly and will keep prices fair for other banks. This is interesting to me because it's discussing banks integrating with financial networks or platforms, but also setting restrictions on the partnerships so that they don't gain too much power. It's almost like they know these bank integrations with financial networks will be powerful. So it seems obvious the rules might be focused somewhat on crypto integrations. At the time of the video, Ripple was still in court with the SEC. The case was settled sooner than I anticipated, 42 days before the lunar eclipse. All the townspeople rejoiced the ruling, and XRP did nothing. Then the SEC appealed the ruling October 2nd, precisely on the solar eclipse. So take note, banking reforms hit precisely on the lunar eclipse, while the appeal of the Torres ruling hit precisely on the solar eclipse, connecting them through the cosmos. Because X is the 24th letter and the settlement was reached 42 days before the lunar eclipse when the reforms were passed, the numerology further connects these as main topics on the world stage and makes Ripple's advance to the Supreme Court in 2024 extra special. Furthermore, when the appeal happened during the solar eclipse, the sun was positioned in Libra. Libra represents balance, justice, harmony, and justice, in my opinion, is where XRP is headed. The Supreme Court will bring an end to the case that will give XRP absolute legal domination over digital assets in the United States. There will be no other assets that have the same clarity as XRP, and combined with the banking reforms we just discussed, it's clear they know something is about to happen that could shift the power dynamics in the banking system. We're just nearing the end of the fourth act, which means the conclusion is next. Before the appeal, I exposed how one of the possible dates they might appeal left 91 days in the year. I missed it by 1 day, but the day it happened on the eclipse can also have that numerology depending on how it's counted. So that 9-1 numerology shows further how the event was merely a continuation of the regulations narrative. For example, it's like how Sam Bankman-Fried took center stage during November 2022's eclipse season, and FTX declared bankruptcy on November 11th. 2 days before, the market made its first initial bottom here at the dotted lines on November 9th, so 11-9 using the Gregorian calendar, which of course is 9/11 backwards. Then if you focus on the Latin Novem, then November is obviously the 9th month, and that bankruptcy was declared on the 11th, giving you 9/11. So both the market pivot at the bottom and the narrative it carried with it connects to the narrative that's still unfolding in regulations as we head to the top of the market. And as we approach the top, it only makes sense that XRP is giving clarity and redeems the whole crypto space. As above, so below. The appeal was also just before the draconian meteor shower. And in the fall look ahead, I had anticipated something with lower energy to happen, and while maybe this news was too much for some to bear, it reflected the sense of irony I imagined it might, because the Draco constellation is where draconian laws come from, and it's safe to say that overly harsh sentiment was felt about what the SEC was doing as the meteor shower was taking place in the days after the appeal. Sentiment dove in general during those days too, as war escalations arrived right on cue, canceling Uptober. I didn't explicitly cite this in the video, but going forward, assume that war escalations are part of the eclipse season. The last interesting bit of recap here is that I had said the July 5th day, which was the midpoint for eclipses, likely would be the pivot point for the whole market, but this was only true for XRP. If you haven't seen before, XRP does seem to actually bottom before Bitcoin. This has happened recently in July, but also as the market had pivoted in 2022. And this even happened as far back as 2014. Seeing that the market is moving up now, I believe that July 5th bottom will hold for XRP. Bitcoin bottomed later in August, which was accompanied with pretty significant volume for this range. And this deep wick here indicates bullish sentiment for confirmation. So this is pretty awesome to see this, both because of how reactive XRP is to the eclipse energies, but also because it provides a confluence for me that the market did start to pivot during the eclipse season, just as it has before. So right now, maybe the last good buying opportunity because everything is still unfolding like clockwork. If this continues, it seems possible to me that the market top arrives around the March eclipse. If this is the case, you probably don't want to wait for the eclipse to sell off this time. I think you will want to do it slightly before. Some alts might reach higher highs during a retrace rally, but you can't totally know which ones beforehand. Throughout this cycle, eclipses have been marking pivot points just as clear as day. So with that being said, the next major pivot should be happening around March. A famous trader named W.D. Gann once said that market extremes will often repeat in the same months of different years. So take a look at the extremes marked by March, September, and November during the past few years. You can pause this if you need to. This adds confluence to March being an extreme, with the eclipse season suggesting it will be a high, as well as the current September-October area being a low, giving that further confirmation. So the big picture is to be on the lookout for tops coming in before that March eclipse, possibly even in February depending on the coin. I think this could end up being a nasty bear market based on how we're seeing continual escalations of the war in the Middle East during these eclipses and their midpoints. To make matters worse, Neptune is entering Aries the day before the March eclipse, and the last time this happened was during the American Civil War, so there are some major negative energies on the horizon. There are a few other ways to view the midpoints, and I noticed between the September 18th lunar eclipse and the March 29th solar eclipse, so the longest distance to create a midpoint from, that it left 96 days on either side, which is a number that is often tied into rituals of some kind because esoterically it represents a mirror, or as above, so below. The order of the numbers doesn't always matter in numerology because it reduces to the same thing. 9 plus 6 and 6 plus 9 both equal 15 and reduce to 6, so keep that in mind. Now, the December 15th midpoint between the last and next lunar eclipses puts 88 days between them. And what's crazier is when you look at the solar eclipse midpoint on December 30th, 86 shows up in the date numerology, which is the reverse war code. There are also 15 days between these midpoints, which is the sum of either 9 and 6 or 6 and 9, giving more significance to something war-related happening between the midpoints. If you didn't know, both major world wars had a 68 date numerology, so should we expect to see something different? I'll let you decide. Now, when you look at the midpoint between the recent October 2nd solar eclipse and the coming March 14th lunar eclipse, you get December 22nd. Hold on to that date for just a second because it's key to understand how significant the number 88 is. So to briefly recap this, it's connected to Trump, it's connected to war, and one of the eclipse midpoints is usually always 88 days away. It's infinity, it's the analemma of the sun, it's pretty important. From that December 22nd date, I counted 88 days and arrived at March 20th, which is almost right in the middle of that next eclipse season, whose date gives you a 68, the war code. I know that's probably a lot to take in, so to put this as simple as possible, I think we'll see something happen on the world stage around the new year, and what happens will be connected to what happens in March. Keep in mind, near the last solar eclipse midpoint in July, we saw the attempted assassination on Donald Trump just 8 days after the 88-day solar eclipse midpoint. By now, everyone has sort of forgotten how many assassination attempts there have been at this point, so logically they're overlooking how the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand kicked off World War I. Think about that. One guy sparked a world war. So Trump is just one man, and it's probably fair to say that at least half of the US and possibly the world likes Trump. I know some world leaders do too. I don't think anybody is thinking this election will be one-sided at this point, and having a country split on which puppet they'd like and control would be yet another way to fuel the fire of division, which I kind of think is the ultimate goal. Remember that alignment with Neptune in the Civil War. That's coming in March. And recently Pluto entered Aquarius, and it only happens once every 248 years. The last time it happened as the American Revolution was ending and the French Revolution was beginning. This alignment is known for societal reformations, rebellions, uprisings, decentralization of power, and technological innovations. Does that sound familiar? So naturally, this election season is bound to bring the uncertainty that we discussed earlier in the video. Maybe the legitimacy of the voting system is questioned, and with the hurricanes in the south, it's possible there could be major disruptions to the election that are similar to what happened in 2000 with Gore and Bush. So from a TA perspective, I can see the markets rallying in anticipation of the election, which is the purple area here. But I think near the election, some uncertainty will develop that could actually last until late December if the results are delayed. It's natural that we would see some type of pullback after we touch the all-time high before we can push our way through it. Of course, around the same time during the eclipse midpoints, shown by this red area right in here, there may be an escalation of the war or a black swan involving it. It could be a fearful time in the market. From there, though, as of now, I expect the market to pivot to the upside once again until perhaps March. December 21st is also the winter solstice, and both solstices can cause volatility either way, so that could be when markets start to rip. So you probably notice a lot of events on this chart. I can't even zoom out far enough to include March, but I think we've covered most of the important ones, and for the most part, they're colored with red. The blue events are more minor celestial events, like Jupiter will be in opposition just 2 days before the election. Jupiter often fosters optimism, risk-taking, and confidence, which aligns perfectly with my thoughts of rallying into or just before the election. That same time, there will be an FOMC meeting where no matter what they do, will likely be seen as bullish by the markets because they're not going to raise rates. Notice that at the exact same time that this uncertainty following the election may occur, there are also a lot of crypto events around the world shown by these lighter dotted lines, which no doubt some of them are going to be bringing in good news. This is all happening during the Leonids meteor shower, which is fairly insignificant, although it may bring volatility. And surprise, the Leo constellation rules over confidence, so it could combine with Jupiter's influence to wrong foot the market. Now, on top of everything we've already talked about, you can see how crammed full of events mid-December is. So it might almost be better to look at it all by color. Yellow is mostly mainstream financial meetings or releases. The Fed's annual meeting on the economy is December 12th. The FOMC meeting to discuss interest rates is the 17th and 18th. Then you have Geminid meteor shower, retail sales report. There's just too much going on to comment on it all. But what you can take away is that there will be a lot of economic data coming out as we begin Mercury retrograde. That would be one of the more important things happening in here. It seems obvious to me that economic data will be bad and that Mercury retrograde will amplify the fearful feelings during December while we also cross our eclipse midpoints and deal with more uncertainty in the markets and on the world stage. Then, just after the new year in January, the World Economic Forum will be hosted in Davos while the IMF and the World Bank have their annual meetings. Usually crypto is discussed at these meetings, and if all goes how I'm thinking it could, that could be adding to the overall market euphoria. So, like, it might not look exactly like I have it laid out here. I do have a little bit more conviction in something like this happening right here, where we have the high coming in by the election, but I'm not really sure what will happen, like, after that, but, eventually working its way towards, like, a March top or February top. So that pretty much sums it up. I hope everyone's locked in and ready for the show, because this is historically when altcoins really start to rip. I think Bitcoin could end up doing something that looks a little bit like this. Maybe not quite as exaggerated as that, but like you can see that this kind of just carries that sort of parabolic curve. And I remember there was a lot of like left translation kind of cycle talk in like this area here. And so like this top angle actually just kind of pushes you back into that feeling a little bit. I don't know exactly how it happens, but I imagine it could be something like this with just a equally volatile and horrible side coming down. So enjoy the show and stay safe.